Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're opening up a file that, well, it plunged New York City into absolute darkness in the mid-1970s. We're going to be taking a very close look at the sources related to David Berkowitz, the serial killer who etched his name into history, the son of Sam, and, of course, the .44 caliber killer.
And this is a deep dive that really requires absolute clarity and a great deal of respect for the gravity of what happened. Berkowitz's crime spree terrorized 5 boroughs. It started in late 1975 and really culminated in that infamous Summer of Sam in 1977.
Yeah.
Our sources confirm a chilling tally. You're looking at a series of stabbings and shootings that led to 6 deaths and the wounding of 11 other people, mostly, young people just sitting in parked cars.
The atmosphere of that time?
Yeah.
It's nearly impossible to really imagine now, the sheer, terrifying randomness of the attacks. And then you couple that with the fact that the NYPD launched what was possibly the largest, most desperate manhunt the city had ever seen. It was a true crisis.
It was.
So we're going beyond the headlines here to really understand the complexity.
That's precisely our mission. To move past that, that simple narrative of a madman driven by a possessed dog, we're going to systematically analyze the documentation from his fragmented early life, the specifics of the investigation timeline.
The psychological profile, the media's role in all of it.
Exactly. The way the media just escalated the panic, and critically, the enduring unresolved controversies around his later claims of cult involvement. We're focusing on how one weapon, a .44 special caliber bulldog revolver, became the absolute signature of fear.
So let's unpack this, and I think we have to start with the formative years. The sources really suggest that his early life created a perfect storm for what came later. We have to go back to Brooklyn, June 1st, 1953, where the details of his birth, right from the get-go, set up this foundational identity crisis.
They absolutely do. He was born Richard David Falco, and our sources are very clear on this. He was given up just days after birth. His biological mother, Elizabeth Betty Broader, was a Jewish waitress married to an Italian-American.
Okay, but that's not the whole story, is it?
No. The complication was that his biological father was a man named Joseph Kleinman, a married Jewish businessman. So there's this layer of secrecy from day one.
It sounds like a narrative straight out of a novel, a tangle of secrets and, like you said, a fragmented heritage. So he was adopted by Pearl and Nathan Berkowitz, who were Jewish hardware store retailers, and they renamed him David Richard Berkowitz.
Right. And while the home environment was, by all accounts, stable, maybe even a bit overly indulgent by his adoptive mother, the early signs of trouble were there very, very early on.
So the stability was just on the surface?
Pretty much. I mean, he showed above average intelligence, but he quickly developed these serious behavioral issues. The sources frequently mention 2 key patterns in his childhood: a persistent infatuation with petty larceny, and much more ominously, a fascination with starting fires.
Arson. That seems significant.
Hugely significant. For him, arson was a key mechanism of control long before a gun ever entered the picture.
Control. That's a powerful word here, because arson, it's destructive, but it's clandestine. It grants the perpetrator the sense of hidden power over their environment. Was this tied to his struggle to fit in?
It seems to have been, yeah. He faced persistent bullying, often for being Jewish and for being, as he was described, chubby. Relatives and neighbors actually consulted psychotherapists because they found him difficult, spoiled, and increasingly withdrawn.
And this instability, it escalated, didn't it?
It escalated dramatically when his adoptive mother, Pearl, who he was extremely devoted to, died of breast cancer. He was only 14. This was really the first major blow to whatever stable emotional structure he had.
But the sources, they identify what they call the primary crisis much later, after his time in the military. Tell us about that period.
So after high school, Berkowitz enlisted and served with the U.S. Army. He spent time stationed in Korea. He received an honorable discharge in June of 1974. His military service is significant because it gave him a structure and a stability that he desperately needed.
And once that structure was gone,
the chaos returned. And it was exacerbated by the fact that he was already seeking answers about his birth.
And he found them. He located his birth mother, Betty. And that revelation was, as the sources put it, truly shattering.
It was. Discovering he was given away and that his biological father was a married man who had never acknowledged him. It just completely fractured his sense of self. One forensic anthropologist, Elliot Layton, described this as shattering his identity. He highlighted how distressed Berkowitz was by this array of reluctant father figures he uncovered. He felt completely rejected and betrayed by the very circumstances of his existence.
So you've got this pattern building. A deeply troubled individual, high intelligence, intense feelings of rejection, a history of destructive behavior like arson. And now, a complete psychological destabilization after losing the military structure and the trauma of his origin.
Exactly. He started working these non-professional jobs, a taxi driver, a letter sorter for the Postal Service. But this period right here, this is the transition to outright lethal violence.
This is the critical link.
It is. The sources indicate that his first attempts at murder were deeply disorganized, and they involved a knife, which suggests he hadn't yet perfected his methodology. He later confessed to a hunting knife attack on Christmas Eve, 1975, in Co-op City.
These initial stabbings are so often overlooked in the Son of Sam narrative, but they are absolutely crucial to understanding his escalating pathology. He targeted 2 women.
Right. One victim remains unidentified in the police records, just described as a Hispanic woman. But the second was a 15-year-old girl named Michelle Foreman, who he stabbed 6 times near Dreiserloop.
And she survived.
She survived, but she was hospitalized for a week. The injuries were that severe. This demonstrates that his fixation on young female victims was established well before the .44 caliber shootings began. Yeah. The stabbings went completely unconnected to him at the time, which allowed him to relocate to an apartment in Yonkers and continue his planning. He was learning from his failure to kill with the knife.
He needed a more reliable weapon.
One that provided distance and guaranteed lethality.
And this is where the story shifts dramatically. The purchase of that Charter Arms Bulldog .44 special revolver turns him from an anonymous stabber into a citywide terror. The whole atmosphere of New York City changed, really overnight, with that first attributed shooting on July 29th, 1976.
The location was Pelham Bay in the Bronx. The victims were Donna Lauria, who was 18 and an EMT, and Jody Valenti, 19, a nurse. They were just sitting in Valenti's parked car around 1:10 in the morning. Donna Lauria was the one who noticed the man approaching quickly.
And this is an important detail, isn't it? The speed and the precision of the attack. Lauria actually noticed the approach and confronted him.
She did. The sources describe the man producing the gun, crouching down, bracing his elbow on his knee, and then firing.
Lauria was killed instantly. A single shot to the neck.
Yes. Valenti was shot in the thigh, and she survived. And she provided the first critical description. A white male, possibly in his 30s, about 5'8", 200 pounds, with dark curly hair in a mod style.
In the car.
Neighbors recalled seeing an unfamiliar yellow compact car, which was later identified as Berkowitz's Ford Galaxy, just cruising the area for hours beforehand. That deliberate nature of the shot, bracing the elbow, it suggested an attacker who had really thought through the mechanics of the crime.
But the police didn't immediately connect this to a single perpetrator. And that's largely because the next attack happened across borough lines, right? October 23, 1976, in Flushing, Queens, near Bound Park.
Exactly. Carl Denaro, 20, and Rosemary Keenan, 18. They were in Keenan's parked car, and the windows just shattered. Denaro described it as the car exploding. He suffered a severe head wound that required a metal plate in his skull. Keenan had superficial injuries from the glass.
And the police theory on this one was chilling. They suspected the shooter might have mistaken Denaro for a woman because he had shoulder-length hair.
Yes, but here's the problem. Ballistics confirmed the .44 caliber bullets, yet the geographical separation Queens instead of the Bronx meant that the precinct lines just hampered the immediate synthesis of the evidence. There was no centralized task force yet.
And that procedural friction, that lack of communication, it just allowed the killer to strike again. November 27, 1976, Floral Park, Queens.
Donna DeMasi, 16, and Joanne Lamino, 18. They were sitting on Lamino's porch after midnight.
So this attack is different. It wasn't a car ambush.
No, he approached them directly, dressed in military fatigues, and he asked for directions in what a witness described as a high-pitched voice. Then he drew the revolver.
DeMasi was shot in the neck but survived. But Joanne Lamino.
Tragically, she was hit in the back, and the injury left her permanently paralyzed, rendered paraplegic.
And to add to the investigation's confusion, a key witness saw a blonde man flee the scene, holding the pistol in his left hand.
Right. And that contrast between the initial dark-haired suspect and this blonde man just further complicated the idea of a lone perpetrator.
That kind of contradictory description, the height, the hair color, the location, it must have been absolutely devastating for investigators trying to establish any kind of pattern. It suggests either multiple shooters or a deliberate attempt by the killer to disguise himself, playing into the media narrative.
The public, though, was starting to piece things together before the police officially did. The next attack, January 30, 1977, in Forest Hills, Queens. That one forced the police's hand.
This was Christine Freund, 26, the secretary, and her fiancé, John Deal, who was 30. They were sitting in Deal's car near the LIRR station.
3 shots penetrated the car. Freund was hit twice and died hours later. Deal sustained only minor injuries.
And this was the true turning point for public acknowledgement.
It was. Following this incident, a Sergeant Richard Conlon publicly stated that police were leaning towards a connection in all these cases. They confirmed the .44 caliber link and, crucially, noted that the victims seemed to be young women with long dark hair, a pattern that just instantly amplified the fear factor across the entire city.
And they released composite sketches, still hedging their bets, showing both a black-haired and a blonde suspect. So they were still acknowledging that possibility of multiple perpetrators.
The intensity only increased 6 weeks later on March 8, 1977. Virginia Voskerikian, a 20-year-old Columbia University student, was walking home in Forest Hills. She was only a block from where Christine Freund had been shot.
And she tried to defend herself.
She lifted her textbooks defensively, but the bullet struck her in the head. She was killed instantly.
This is where the investigation finally coalesced. 2 days later, on March 10th, NYPD officials and Mayor Abraham Beame, they made the definitive, terrifying declaration. The same .44 Bulldog revolver had fired the shots that killed both Donna Lauria and Virginia Voskerikian.
Yes, and while our sources note that later official documents suggested the ballistics evidence was actually inconclusive at that specific stage, that initial public statement, that was the accelerant for a massive media explosion. The circulation of tabloids like the New York Post and the Daily News just soared as the case became known as the .44 caliber killer case.
And despite the high-profile nature of the investigation, the creation of this major task force, the killer struck again. April 17th, 1977, Alexander Esau, 20, and Valentina Suriani, 18, an aspiring model.
They were in a car near the Hutchinson River Parkway Service Road in the Bronx, terrifyingly close to the original Lauria Valenti scene.
So he returned to his original hunting ground.
He did. Both were shot in the head. Suriani died immediately. Esau died hours later. Police confirmed the weapon was the same. But this attack was profoundly significant, not just because it was the 6th fatal shooting, but because of what the killer left behind.
The nature of the crisis changes entirely here. I mean, the physical attacks were horrifying, but the introduction of communication that turned this from a police procedural nightmare into a psychological horror show for the whole city.
That's a perfect way to put it. Near the bodies of Esau and Suriani, police found a handwritten letter. It was addressed to NYPD Captain Joseph Borelli.
And this letter is the origin story of Son of Sam.
It is. He started by identifying himself using that name, explicitly contrasting it with the press's moniker. The psychological profile he presented was instantly recognizable, a claim of external, irresistible control. He asserted he was programmed to kill by a demon manifested in the form of a black dog belonging to his neighbor, Sam.
The language is both chilling and pathetic in a way. He claimed deep hurt at being labeled a women hater, insisting he was instead the monster, Beelzebub, and the chubby behemoth.
It's pure narcissism.
Yeah, a need to correct the public's perception of him, even while confessing to murder.
He used specific disturbing phrases, demanding blood for Papa, linking it directly to this demonic need for Sam to preserve his youth. And then there was that strange, mysterious phrase, "Ugh, me hooted hurt, sonny boy."
And investigators at the time, they hypothesized he might be familiar with Scottish English, right? Translating it loosely to, "My heart it hurts, sonny boy," maybe revealing some deeper unresolved pain tied to his own identity.
It's possible. Based on this highly personalized, bizarre communication, police released a psychological profile on May 26, 1977. The profile determined the suspect was a neurotic, likely suffering from paranoid schizophrenia, and convinced he was possessed.
This diagnosis gave them a context for his apparent lack of remorse and his belief that the commands were external to him.
Right.
But here's where it gets really interesting. The killer didn't just want the police's attention, he wanted the public's. On May 30th, 1977, he sent a second, more sophisticated letter to the Daily News columnist Jimmy Breslin, turning the investigation into a national spectacle.
The Breslin letter was a carefully crafted piece of theatrical terror. I mean, the envelope itself was disturbing. It bore these centered lines: blood and family darkness and death, absolute depravity, .44. It opened with this grotesque, almost literary description of the gutters of NYC, which are filled with dog manure, vomit, stale wine, urine, and blood.
He used Breslin's column as his personal megaphone. He thanked him for the interest, explicitly referenced the first victim, Donna Lauria, and then delivered that ominous threat. Tell me, Jim, what will you have for July 29th, the exact anniversary of the first shooting?
He also threw down these specific taunts for the police: the Duke of Death, the Wicked King Wicker, and that strange promise to buy detectives new shoes when he was captured. The sophisticated wording, the calligraphy-like handwriting, it was so distinct that police initially wondered if the writer might work in, say, a graphic design studio.
And the decision by the Daily News to publish that letter, even with some redactions, that was huge. What was the immediate fallout from that?
Unprecedented public panic. That edition of the Daily News became the highest selling in the paper's history up to that point. It sold over 1.1 million copies. The media realized that terror sold papers, and they leaned heavily into the Son of Sam persona.
And the city reacted with this palpable, visible fear. Since the police had officially declared the victims were predominantly young women with long, dark hair, we see this incredible collective effort by women across the city to protect themselves.
Thousands of women got short haircuts or dyed their hair blonde. The demand for wigs, cheap, synthetic, bright blonde wigs, it just skyrocketed. Women were instructed to move away from the curb when walking alone to avoid parked cars. The city was gripped by a siege mentality. Nightlife and dating just declined sharply that summer.
And despite this unprecedented police dragnet focused heavily on Queens and the Bronx, the killer struck one final devastating time on July 31st, 1977, just 2 days after that ominous anniversary, and this time he moved to Brooklyn, hitting the Bath Beach neighborhood.
Stacy Moskowitz, 20, a secretary, and Robert Violante, 20, a clothing salesman. They were sitting in Violante's car under a streetlight. It was, ironically, their first date. The attacker approached the passenger side and fired 4 rounds.
Violante lost his left eye but survived, though he was permanently disfigured. Tragically, Stacy Moskowitz died from her injuries, becoming the 6th fatality.
And it is particularly striking that she was the only blonde victim of the .44 caliber shootings. It contradicted that established dark hair target pattern and perhaps suggested an increased level of desperation or randomness in this final attack. Our deepest sympathy goes out to Stacy, Robert, and all the victims who suffered at the hands of this terror.
The year-long investigation had been just plagued by confusion, conflicting descriptions, the sheer volume of tips, and the breakthrough, when it came, it wasn't from some massive centralized intelligence effort. It came from a small administrative detail. A parking ticket.
Right. Here's where the mundane intersects with history. The crucial witness was a woman named Cecilia Davis, a local resident walking her dog near the Moskowitz-Violante shooting. She observed a patrol officer, Michael Catania, ticketing a car parked illegally near a fire hydrant.
Okay.
And just moments later, a young man walked past her, holding what she described as a dark object.
And when she heard the shots fired shortly afterward, she realized the connection.
She did. She contacted police 4 days later, providing the tip that led detectives to check the administrative records for every single car ticketed in that area that night. And Berkowitz's distinctive yellow 1970 Ford Galaxy was identified among them.
That detail about the yellow car, seen cruising the area of the very first shooting a year prior, it suddenly connected the beginning and the end. But the next connection, that's where the identity of Sam really solidified.
Absolutely. On August 9, 1977, an NYPD detective, James Justice, called the Yonkers Police Department to schedule an interview with Berkowitz, based purely on the ticket. The dispatcher who took the call was a woman named Wheatcar. She recognized the name instantly and said, "Let me tell you about him. I know him."
And she volunteered that Berkowitz had shot and wounded a black Labrador retriever belonging to her father, Sam Carr.
The name Sam, the neighbor, the dog owner, it immediately provided the horrifying confirmation that the dog and demon claim in the letter was tied to a real person, or at least a person he was fixated on. The full circle of that bizarre narrative was complete.
So the very next day, August 10th, 1977, police descended on Berkowitz's apartment building at 35 Pine Street in Yonkers.
They staked out his car, and they saw a .44 caliber bullet, the exact type used in the shootings, right there on the front seat. This gave them the probable cause they needed for a search.
And what did they find in that car?
They found a duffel bag packed with ammunition, meticulously drawn maps of all the crime scenes, and perhaps the most chilling find, a fresh, threatening letter addressed to Inspector Timothy Dowd, the head of the police task force. It confirmed Berkowitz had been preparing for his next attack.
So they waited for him.
They waited for him to leave his apartment. Around 10 p.m., Berkowitz exited and got into his car. The sources described the scene with this palpable tension. Detective John Filatico approached the driver's side and placed his gun near Berkowitz's temple.
He was immediately restrained. And the gun?
The Charter Arms .44 caliber Bulldog revolver, wrapped in a brown paper bag, was found right next to him on the seat. His immediate reaction was famously captured. "Well, you got me."
And when Detective Flodico asked, "Now that I've got you, who have I got?" Berkowitz's chilling reply confirmed everything.
"I'm Sam, David Berkowitz." The sources also record an alternate, equally unsettling quote, "How come it took you such a long time?" A final taunt about his success in eluding that massive manhunt.
The subsequent search of his apartment revealed satanic graffiti and, crucially, those meticulous diaries documenting hundreds of fires across the city.
Yes. Berkowitz quickly confessed to not only the shootings, but also to being the Phantom of the Bronx. He claimed responsibility for over 2,000 arsons throughout the 1970s. This confirmed his long history of seeking control through destructive anonymity.
And then Mayor Bean made the official announcement. The people of the city of New York can rest easy because of the fact that the police have captured a man whom they believe to be the son of Sam. A collective sigh of relief just passed over the entire city.
During the initial interrogation, Berkowitz maintained the dog story. He claimed the neighbor's black Labrador was possessed by an ancient demon that commanded him to kill. But the narrative began to shift almost immediately.
That's the key, isn't it? Just over a month later, in a letter to the New York Post dated September 19, 1977, he alluded to the possession story, but then he closed with this cryptic warning. There are other sons out there. God help the world.
And that was the first hint of a larger, organized narrative. Maybe a means to minimize his own singular responsibility.
Yeah. And by February 1979, he completely retracted the demonic possession claims, admitting they were a total hoax.
He told a court-appointed psychiatrist that he had long contemplated murder out of a desire for revenge on a world he felt had rejected him. He even confessed he had been planning to end his spree by being killed in a blaze of glory at a Hamptons nightclub.
So the self-serving nature of that initial possession claim was exposed.
It was. But the legal process was already underway. Despite defense counsel suggesting an insanity plea based on his bizarre behavior, 3 separate mental health examinations determined he was competent to stand trial.
And he refused the insanity plea. He pleaded guilty to all the shootings on May 8, 1978.
The courtroom drama didn't end there, though. At his sentencing 2 weeks later, he caused this shocking scene, trying to jump out of a 7th-floor window, screaming obscenities, including "Stacy was a whore," and shouting, "I'd kill her again, I'd kill them all again."
He was again found competent after yet another evaluation, which led to his final sentencing on June 12, 1978. He received 6 concurrent life sentences, 25 years to life for each murder. The capture was a relief, but the man himself remained a psychological puzzle. And the story of the lone gunman, well, it was about to face decades of scrutiny.
This is perhaps the most difficult section to navigate, because it involves so much contradictory evidence and a killer who has proven himself time and again to be a completely unreliable narrator.
Right. The story of the lone demon-driven killer, which then morphed into the lone revenge-driven killer, was then challenged by Berkowitz himself 20 years later.
But we have to be strict here and just present the claims and counterclaims as they appear in the documentation. In the mid-1990s, Berkowitz, having undergone this profound personal change, he converted to evangelical Christianity, now referring to himself as Son of Hope. He drastically altered his confession.
The new narrative was. It was shocking. He claimed the shootings were not the work of a lone, revenge-driven narcissist, but were orchestrated as ritual murders by a violent satanic cult, which he said he joined around 1975.
And here is the crucial element of this revised story. He minimized his direct involvement. He claimed he only fired the gun in the very first attack, Loria and Valenti, and the 6th one, Esau and Sirianni.
And the rest?
The rest, he said, the remaining 4 fatal shootings, plus the non-fatal ones, were carried out by accomplices, lookouts, drivers, and other shooters.
Why? Why introduce this narrative change after 2 decades in prison?
Well, psychological profilers suggest it aligns with his history of seeking self-absolution. Confessing to being part of a larger organized group, a cult, it allows him to transfer the ultimate moral responsibility away from himself. It mitigates the guilt of being the sole monster.
And his religious conversion provided the perfect platform for this confession about the cult, framing it as repentance, not deception.
Exactly. He did, however, name specific accomplices. John and Michael Carr, the sons of his former neighbor Sam Carr, he alleged they were also sons of Sam.
But the sources point out the logistical difficulty there. Both Carr brothers were deceased by 1979. John was found dead in North Dakota in 1978, ruled a suicide, and Michael died in a fatal car accident in 79.
Right. Berkowitz alleged John perpetrated the Damasi Lamino shooting. He also threw in claims of other shadowy figures. A female cult member firing at De Niro and Keenan, and a prominent cult associate known only as Manson II carrying out the Ferndale shooting. He was suggesting an entire network of participants.
These claims were compelling enough, though, that they actually reopened the case, didn't they?
They were. The Yonkers police formally reopened the case in 1996, specifically investigating the claims of accomplices and satanic cult activity.
So let's examine the evidence supporting the accomplice theory, because it does go back to those original confusing police files.
Absolutely. The evidence supporting the theory is the same evidence that initially plagued the investigation. John Santucci, who was the Queens district attorney at the time, and a police investigator named Mike Novertny, both publicly expressed their conviction that Berkowitz had accomplices, a view that was shared by Donna Lauria's father.
And one of the original investigators, Richard Johnson, pointed directly to those unresolved physical discrepancies that Berkowitz's later claim helps to explain. He asked, why are there 3 suspect cars, 5 different suspect descriptions, different heights, different shapes, different sizes of the perpetrator? If Berkowitz was the sole gunman, the eyewitness testimony just makes no sense.
And the victims and their families also voiced significant doubts about the lone gunman theory. Carl De Niro, the survivor who was shot in the head, stated his belief that more than one person was involved, specifically because Berkowitz's initial statement to police about his crime scene was, in De Niro's view, totally false.
And John Deal, Christine Fryn's fiancé, also disputed Berkowitz's account of their encounter. Deal recalled physically bumping into Berkowitz outside the restaurant before they got in the car, and he contends that Berkowitz's official timeline made it impossible for him to sneak up on them and fire the shots minutes later.
So Deal was suggesting someone else must have been lying in wait.
Exactly.
But despite the physical evidence of multiple descriptions and the concerns of victims and investigators, that 1996 investigation was ultimately suspended indefinitely. The findings regarding the cult were just inconclusive. However, officially the case does remain open in New York.
So now, let's look at the counterargument. The skeptics who reject the cult claims entirely. And these are often the people who knew Berkowitz best in the immediate aftermath of his arrest.
Take Jimmy Breslin, the journalist who received that notorious letter. Breslin stated emphatically that when they talked to Berkowitz the night of the arrest, he recalled everything step by step by step. The guy has 1,000% recall, and that's it. Breslin viewed the cult story as a pure fabrication.
And what about the profilers?
Well, former FBI profiler John Edward Douglas, who spent extensive time interviewing Berkowitz for his book on serial killers, concluded that Berkowitz was an introverted loner, not capable of being involved in group activity. He saw no evidence whatsoever that Berkowitz had the social capacity required to organize or participate in a sophisticated group like a satanic cult.
Just didn't fit the profile.
Not at all. And NYPD psychologist Dr. Harvey Schlossberg views the later cult claims as a complete fantasy, designed solely to absolve Berkowitz of guilt and redirect blame. I mean, when you remember that Berkowitz himself initially admitted that the dog and devil story was a hoax, it just raises serious credibility issues for any subsequent self-serving narratives he constructs. He has a demonstrated pattern of using theatricality to avoid full responsibility.
It leaves you in this frustrating limbo, doesn't it? Do you believe the initial, specific, detailed confession of a lone perpetrator who demonstrated, as Breslin said, 1,000% recall? Or the later narrative that conveniently explains all the physical discrepancies found by the police?
And regardless of the truth behind the cult claims, the facts of Berkowitz's capture and conviction, they remain immutable, as does his profound legacy on American law and culture.
His incarceration began in maximum security facilities, Attica, then Sullivan, then Shawangunk, and his time inside has been fraught. In 1979, he survived a severe attack where the left side of his neck was slashed, requiring more than 50 stitches.
And he refused to identify his assailant. He viewed the attack as just punishment, claiming he was grateful for the violence he received. This aligns with his deep-seated need for punishment and his later evangelical conversion.
That conversion, which happened in 1987, was the impetus for this profound change in his persona. He now wishes to be referred to as the Son of Hope. He is reportedly a model prisoner, graduated with honors from Sullivan Community College, and he actively counsels troubled inmates through prison ministry.
He publishes essays on faith and repentance, though he is denied personal computer access. And his parole status offers a unique insight into his current mindset. Although he's eligible for a hearing every 2 years, his 12th denial was in May of 2024, he consistently refuses to ask for his release.
He attends the hearings not to petition for freedom, but to apologize.
Exactly. To apologize for his crimes and express his profound remorse to the victims' families. Before his first hearing in 2002, he wrote to Governor George Pataki requesting it be canceled, stating, "In all honesty, I believe that I deserve to be in prison for the rest of my life. I have, with God's help, long ago come to terms with my situation, and I have accepted my punishment."
Beyond his personal fate, the intense media focus on Berkowitz and the potential for him to profit from his horrifying story that led to a major legal change, the Son of Sam law.
The New York State legislature moved swiftly to prevent convicted criminals from financially capitalizing on their notoriety. The original law was challenged and struck down by the Supreme Court in 1991, citing violations of the First Amendment's freedom of speech guarantees.
But New York passed a constitutionally revised version the following year.
Yes, and the revised law was successful because it shifted the focus from the content of the work, which is protected, to the financial gain derived from the notoriety of the crime. That revised structure proved sound, and similar laws are now enacted in 41 states and at the federal level. It effectively ensures that crime, in that specific way, does not pay.
Culturally, the name Son of Sam remains instantly recognizable. It deeply influenced American true crime and pop culture, appearing everywhere from Jimmy Breslin's nonfiction account .44 to Spike Lee's 1999 film Summer of Sam, which really captured the terrifying atmosphere of the city that summer.
His story continues to be explored in documentaries like The Sons of Sam, A Descent into Darkness, and in television series like Mindhunter. Even situational comedy has referenced the case, that Seinfeld moment where Newman echoes Berkowitz's arrest, quote, "What took you so long?" It just shows how deeply this event embedded itself into the American psyche.
As we close this extensive deep dive, it is vital to acknowledge the pain and loss suffered by the 6 individuals who were killed. Donna Lauria, Christine Freund, Virginia Voskrishian, Valentina Suriani, Alexander Esau, and Stacy Moskowitz, and of course the 11 who were wounded, along with all of their families. The terror he inflicted was immense.
Berkowitz has, in recent years, attempted to counsel against violence, urging people to take the glory out of guns. And there was a touching moment of closure in 2006, shortly before her own death, when Nasa Moskowitz, Stacy Moskowitz's mother, wrote Berkowitz a letter forgiving him for killing her daughter.
Ultimately, this case provides a complex portrait of a disturbed individual driven by deep-seated rejection and misogyny. His initial detailed confession provides a clear, singular answer, a lone monster. But the lingering physical discrepancies and his own later self-serving claims of cult involvement make the full truth perpetually elusive.
The key finding, however, remains. Berkowitz was a serial killer motivated by personal rage and a narcissistic desire for attention. Whether that was achieved through demonic claims or through later claims of cult membership, both were just methods to manipulate public perception and avoid facing the singular horror of his actions.
So we leave you with this reflection. Considering the stark contradiction between Berkowitz's initial detailed, lone confession and his subsequent extensive claims of minimal involvement within a cult years later, we have to ask ourselves, what does it say about our justice system and our own need for narrative closure that such a high-profile case remains perpetually open due to the conflicting, self-serving words of the perpetrator?